Bad Company was the real deal. I mean, they hit it big and they achieved a lot.
Most bands, you could say 2 or 3 hits you could think about. And this band were like American radio. Do you know what I mean? They were like American radio. They got millions of hits.
They had the greatest singer that rock music's ever produced.
They wanted to strip away all the excess. They wanted to strap on their guitars and deliver basic, bare bones, muscular rock and roll that would make your blood boil.
They devoured Zeppelin. Bad Company was born out of the sort of seminal British blues rock band, which comprised of Paul Rodgers, Simon Kirke, Andy Fraser and Paul Kossoff. And they'd done some wonderful stuff.
That's the way it's got to be. So, Mr. Big, you better watch out. And don't you hang around. No. For you, I was there. A great big hole in the ground.
Things started to go wrong in Free, largely in main due to Paul Kossoff, the guitarist. His sort of growing drug problem got worse and worse till he was missing gigs, and it was sort of very hard for the band to go on. There was some kind of tension between Andy Fraser, the bass player, and Paul Rodgers, so Andy Fraser just abruptly decided to leave, and that left them kind of sort of nowhere, so they split up.
Bad Company may never have happened if Paul Rodgers would have taken up the offer to join Deep Purple in '73.
They phoned me and said they were in the middle of this American tour and the singer wanted to leave, and would I sing for them? And I wasn't sure what I was doing at the time, so I said, let me think about it. And I thought about it and decided against it, just that I didn't really think I would fit in there.
A great big hole in the ground.
He was determined to have a successful band and big sales, big tours. He had enough of the Free kind of cult syndrome. I mean, again, Free had the one single, but Free really never, they didn't have big tours like that. They weren't selling lots of records.
Paul Rodgers went to Peter Grant, who was Led Zeppelin's manager, and asked him if he'd be willing to manage him. And Peter Grant said yes, he would love to do that. And so Paul Rodgers said he wanted to get a band together along similar lines to Free. And he was going to ask Simon Kirke, who'd been the drummer in Free, with him.
Bad Company was a combination of musicians from 3 separate groups. Paul and myself from Free, Mick Rouse from Mott the Hoople, Boz Burrell from King Crimson. Paul had had a band called Peace, and he toured with Mott the Hoople when Free had one of their breakups, and they formed an alliance, a bond, got on very well. And so when Mick left Mott and Free was no longer, Mick and Paul got together and they asked if I'd like to, join, and I said I'd love to, because I just wanted to put Free behind me. It'd been such a weight, such a millstone, and Mick was wonderful. Mick was so funny.
Mick Ralphs had been in a great band called Mott the Hoople with Ian Hunter. Their breakthrough came in the shape of a David Bowie song that David Bowie produced called All the Young Dudes.
Mott the Hoople was kind of entering this glam type of period, and Mick Rouse was anything but glam, although he played great in the band and came up with amazing parts and amazing songs.
I don't think it was really what Mick was comfortable doing. He was a little bit more of a bluesy rock guy.
Paul Rodgers and Mick Rouse really connected as musical soulmates, almost the same way that Paul Rodgers did with Paul Kossoff.
Mick was a songwriter who wrote not only the music, had a lot to do with the melodies, so his guitar parts were orchestrated around that, where Kossoff was really more, would just come up with a riff. He really never knew what the melody was going to be or lyrically, but Mick came in with 2 or 3 big songs from the first record.
You know I'm loving my
Mick and Paul had formed this little bond, and they were like blues oriented. Mick was a little bit more country. So obviously Paul Rodgers and myself had been together 4 or 5 years, so we got on pretty well. And then Boz was this very laid-back, amiable bass player, you know. And when he was the last on the list of bass players, because we hated King Crimson. We had you had the guy from Supertramp, the guy from this band, that band, and we always put Boz at the bottom because we hated King Crimson. So after we've been through 15 bass players, we thought, well, fuck it, we got to try Boz.
Crimson is one of those bands led by Robert Fripp that probably has had 100 members since its inception. So in Crimson, Boz was just another guy who played an electric bass. In Bad Company, Boz realized the potential here.
So Boz arrived, and he was this great-looking guy with a beard, tall, you know. And we said, well, the first song's in G. He said, don't tell me anything. I'll just pick it up as I go along. Well, all right. Doesn't he want to know the chords? So after the first song, we knew he was the one. And the irony is, we only found out later, he'd only been playing bass about 18 months.
We toyed with millions of ideas, and suddenly they said, well, look, we're going to do these gigs, so you better give us a name. So we said, right, Bad Company, and that was it. And that's how it's amazing how quickly you get used to it. Yeah. You just... I hated it when I first started. Did you? You didn't say. Well, I can't think of names for groups.
He like goes through things of thinking, you know, is it good or not?
Oh, what was that amazing name we had? The 4 Million Ables, that was one. Oh, there was the Black Bombers. What about Thunderhead Spitfire and the Black Bombers. Concrete Parachute. What about the Fiddlers? The Fiddlers. We sat them all night, man.
We still came back to Bad Company, didn't we?
Peter Grant took them all on. They called themselves Bad Company, which Peter Grant didn't like at the time. He thought it was a name they shouldn't use, and the record company, which was Led Zeppelin's record company, Swan Song, also didn't like the name. But eventually, Paul Rodgers persuaded them that this was going to be the name of the band. He was convinced, and Peter went along with it.
There were egos in the band, but we were all seasoned musicians. We all got on well. It was almost as if Free and Mott the Hoople had been almost, I don't know, like training grounds for the real thing.
It's hard to know exactly what's going to come out now, but the great thing is that there's an amazing amount of potential, because we have a lot to draw from each other, we have a lot to learn from each other, and that's bound to reflect in the songs, you know.
When you had all these influences stirred up in the pot, you had this explosive hard rock band that was going to take the world by storm.
Led Zeppelin were about to record using a mobile unit at Headley Grange Studios, well, Headley Grange Manor with the mobile studios, and it was delayed for a couple of weeks. So Peter Grant said, do you want to get into the studio and start recording tracks? So they basically put down their first album by jumping the queue from Led Zeppelin.
I think it cost about a couple of $1,000 to make the whole album.
I can't get enough of your love. I can't get enough of your love. I can't get enough of your love.
Well, I take whatever I want, baby, I want you. You know, it starts with you know, you hear on the track recording itself, you hear the guys go 1, 2, 3, ba-da-bam. You know, from the immediate start, you know the guys are in there playing. That's what you get, that the guys are playing. It's not studio control, there's nothing overdubbly and all that. It's just, here we are, 1, 2, 3, 4, in we go.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3.
It was just a count-off that they were going to splice off, and it was just going to come in with the drum, ka-bum-bum. But somebody counted it off, 1, 2, 3, ka-bum-bum, and they all heard it, and they go, wow, that's great.
And that snare snap at the front of it, it's because of putting the bass kick in front. what it tends to do is it tends to just drag the track back before it goes forward. So already it picks you up and just lets you drop into the song.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's late, and I want love. But that love is gonna break me in two. Don't hang me up in your doorway. Don't hang me up like you do. I say, come on, come on, come on and do it. Come on and do what I do. I can't get enough of your love. Oh, baby, can't get enough of your love. Can't get enough of your love.
I remember hearing it on the airwaves in Philadelphia, and from the first opening chords, the song grabs you.
There's an extremely exciting guitar solo, and it's an early example of what's known as dual lead guitar solos, popularised later by Thin Lizzy. But it's where the guitar solo starts and it's just one guitar, and then the second guitar comes in playing an almost identical part, but it's just like a sort of minor third above it.
A couple of interesting things going on from Mick Ralphs on the guitar here. The first thing is that when he actually goes down in the main verse, which is a C to a B flat, and then he plays to an F. But what he does is he goes C, B flat, then he plays an F in the first inversion, and he adds a C on top, which makes it an F suspended, basically on one guitar, so he goes. Yet on the other guitar he's going F, C, F, and the two guitars together create a really beautiful little harmonic structure there. The other guitar that's playing on the record may even be tuned to what's called an open G tuning. It's very difficult to tell because when the two guitars are playing together you can't really tell, but it's the mixture of the two guitars that gives it that really exciting drive to the track, and the shuffle beat from Simon Kirke's drumming. The second section is quite interesting, and it's a typical rock and roll thing. It's using root and fifth, or what's now known as a 5 chord. So if you see it written down in a piece of music, it says G5 or C5, and what that means is it's neither major nor minor, the chord, it's just root and fifth. Free used to use it a lot, and Bad Company used it a lot. So the bridge, he basically goes G5, and then they go to a B flat 5, and they go to an F5, to an E flat 5, and then the chorus is C, F. Up to a G suspended, back to a G.
I can't get enough your love, baby. Oh, mama, I can't get enough your love, alright. I can't get enough your love, baby.
It's the guitar that really dominates, and the drumming is very straight but very, very effective.
It was a sort of swing to it and a swagger.
It was a good example of how Bad Company differed a bit from Free as well. That it was a more up-tempo, more aggressive, sort of hard-hitting approach to rock music that compared to the more laid-back, bluesier elements that Free had been.
What you say? All right. One more time.
When Bad Company plays I Can't Get Enough of Your Love, it's great because the whole audience is like singing, I can't get enough of your love. And I'm like, yeah, you know, I grew up singing that song, and you just really get into it, and they really the audience feels a part. They're like drawn into the music.
I can't get enough of your love. I can't get enough of your love. I can't get enough of your love.
It works on the radio, it works in the house, and you know, you can make love to it, you can get down to it at a bar, and in a stadium rock, it's like a sing-along, you know, it's just got all the qualities. It's really great in its non-complexity.
I think it's something to do with Paul Rodgers' voice. Even though he's sort of a white rocker, retains this sort of this bluesy integrity that even if he was singing about groceries, it would sort of sound kind of vaguely authentic. It's a very sexy voice, very big voice, kind of draws you in.
Say yeah. You say yeah. You say yeah, yeah, yeah. I'll tell you that I love you.
It was just right for the time. It was a perfect illustration of good quality, high energy 70s rock music.
Can't Get Enough is the template for Bad Company's sound. There wasn't a lot of noodling, it wasn't prog rock. It was a song where they stripped away all the fat, there was no filler, and that's what Bad Company was all about.
Don Kirshner TV show in America is early on in their career, and you can see from the second number in, from the power of their performance, they're winning this audience over. And by the time they get to Can't Get Enough of Your Love, which of course is a hit, they had the audience in their hands, and you know, Paul's getting them to sing and clap, and you know, it was a brilliant performance.
Kirshner was huge, and if you got on Don Kirshner, you got pretty well national exposure.
A little misfortune hit me and I'm down. Misunderstanding ran me out of town. A little mistake, she don't understand. I'm in a bad situation, I'm standing at the station. Turn around, round me, yeah. Got to get home now.
Bearing in mind this was well before MTV or music videos, it looks surprisingly tame compared to sort of my memory of how the band were like a big rocking outfit, big, you know, a very sort of kind of hard-edged rock unit. And when I see the Kirshner footage, it's almost like glitzy. You know, the sort of trousers Paul Rodgers is wearing are very kind of very tight and sort of there's glittery bits on it, and you know, Burrell's wearing a sort of flowery top shirt with a sort of, in fact, actually it looks just like Kings of Leon, the way that Burrell looks in this sort of Kirshner footage. A lot of bands sort of currently working, I think they sort of look at old rock footage and they take little bits.
I want to get back home, down this long road, where I'm going. Hope to see you for too long. Time is passing, time is flow, flow, yeah.
A huge part of what Bad Company was about was the look. Paul Rodgers had his own choreography. He would dance with the entire microphone stand. Rod Stewart did the same thing. He'd obviously perfected that with his years with Free. Simon was just kind of a, you know, just a real hard-hitting guy in the back, but Simon was also a great-looking guy, blonde and just, you know, really cut and ripped. And I think Mick Ralph wore these boots on the outside, and the boots came up over his jeans, and I thought, God, on anybody else, that is corny as hell, but it looks so great on the guy.
There was just this newfound freedom when Bad Company came together. It was like all the Christmases had come at once. All the ambition was finally being realized. This is what we were going to do. And Jesus, in the first year, we had a gold album.
When Bad Company was formed, there was a definite gelling together with not only Mick Ralph's guitar playing, but the fact that, as with Paul Rodgers, he was also very prolific as a songwriter. So the two of them were gelling together in that respect, coming up with good songs. Although often they would write songs individually, that they would form a collection of great songs on the albums. And Boz Burrell was, I suppose, a typical bass player. He was just there, solid, reliable.
The one guy who was a little off kilter in terms of his playing, because he came from King Crimson, you know, a prog rock band, was Boz Burrell, but he gave the band just a little bit of uniqueness in terms of his playing that was able to separate them a bit.
The major difference between them and Free is that they had three-part vocals going on, because Mick sang and so did Boz. And also, a lot of people didn't realise that in Free that Paul Rodgers also played a bit of guitar and keyboards, and so he was allowed to do a little bit more of that, because he was really in Bad Company and was the man that formed the band, and he was sort of out front.
Well, obviously on the first album, Bad Company stated their intent with both the name of the band and the album, and obviously the track, which is called Bad Company as well, which is an excellent song. I love the way it starts with its moody piano intro.
Paul is playing a little, I don't know if it's a little Wurlitzer piano. So Paul's playing a little Wurlitzer, and Boz is playing bass, and Mick Ralph is like barely playing guitar, and I think it was a performance on Don Kirshner. And Paul just plays those little minor chords, and it gives you chills.
Company, always on the run. Destiny is the rising sun. Yeah. I was born 6 gun in my hand, behind a gun. I make my final stand.
Paul came up with the initial riff on the piano, and company, just all the black notes, all the flats and sharps on the piano, and he just wanted some help with some lyrics. And I was there, I just happened to be there, and we finished it in 20 minutes. But the thing about Bad Company was it had this sort of riders on the plain, you know, the plains rather, on horses, you know, tumbleweed and, you know, bounty hunters and outlaws things.
It's a cowboy rock and roll. Paul Rodgers understanding the American market in a sense, you know, and it's like a sort of extension of what the blues singers were singing about.
Now, when I first heard Bad Company, I couldn't tell if it was American. I thought it was an American band because it sounded like the sexiest, hot voice. Like, I thought Southern rock, like a Lynyrd Skynyrd.
There's so much drama in the song. To me, it almost puts me in an old Western. It almost gives me that type of a feel. When you close your eyes and then there's the machine gun drumming of Simon Kirke. It's very atmospheric and ethereal, but then it really kicks in for the chorus with the great power chords from Mick Ralph.
That's why I call me Bad Company. I can't deny. Bad Company till the day I die. Yeah.
everybody wants to have their band anthem, and maybe they've got other anthemic songs that make more statement or a bigger stadium rockers, but I think Bad Company is a great track lyrically. Bad Company Till the Day I Die, you know. I mean, it's a biker song, isn't it? It's an outlaw, it's the Hells Angels.
And threw away the sun. Now these towns, they all know our name. Six gun sound is our claim to fame, yeah. Well, I can just hear them say, bad company, I can't deny. Bad company till the day I die. What you now?
I think that they're kind of rock fans who were certainly well into drinking beer at Bad Company gigs and doing lots of downers and all kinds of drugs. They kind of liked, they took this song to heart and liked the sort of kind of the slightly dangerous edge that the imagery of this song suggested.
Typically songs in minor keys, the sad songs, you know, it's kind of a little harder than the big up chords of like Can't Get Enough, but that song did really well. It was unbelievable.
Bad company, oh yeah. Bad company, I can't deny. What I say is bad company, oh, oh, oh. Bad company, all right. Just a lonesome cowboy. Yeah.
It's very reminiscent of some of the songs that Paul used to write in Free. It's got that sort of darkish swagger.
Free was what it was, a very blues-based style of band. Bad Company was a lot more, perhaps geared towards the stadiums, a lot more up-tempo rock, a bit more sort of a macho rock, for want of a better expression.
Bad Company had more hits than Free, you know, but Free were incredibly influential. I think Bad Company were, you know, a great rock band that may possibly not have influenced a whole load of people, just let them enjoy the music for the sake of it.
The Free audience was there a little bit, but I think that this was a whole new ballgame. This was a singles-oriented band. This was major media blitzes, huge magazine ads. I mean, Free had none of that stuff.
Certainly on a commercial level, Bad Company were much more popular. But I do think on a purist level, perhaps Free delivered something that was so intangible but yet so powerful that the shadow of Free over Bad Company probably was never extinguished.
Ready for Love was, you know, it was originally done by Mott the Hoople. It was one of the only songs that Paul said, fuck man, I'd like to sing that. And Mick said, but we've already done it. Paul said, I don't give a shit, I want to record it. So that shows you what a good song it is to sing. It's in A minor, which is a lovely, mellow, sad, melancholic key.
As always with Bad Company, they knew how to get up to, you know, build a song up to a chorus. A lot of their choruses were not dissimilar, but there's nothing wrong with that. You know, that's the style of the band, the style of the writing. There's a couple of nice little things in this song that are slightly different from a lot of other bands. They're using some slightly unusual chords quite cleverly. So you've got basically this little intro. then into a verse which is A minor to C major, to D major, to C major, A minor to G, to D major with an F sharp root, and then all the same again, A minor to C major, to D major, to C major, A minor to G major, to D major with an F sharp root. And then the next thing they do is really quite interesting. It's essentially an open G chord, then playing an A minor chord after it, which sounds like. And then they play a D11 chord to a D major chord. So it's played. Which is great, because it's being able to use all the open strings, and harmonically it's a bit more interesting than your standard chords. And then when it gets to the chorus, they use their usual fifth thing again, root and fifth. So G to A, C to D goes. There's your C to D, there's your G to A. And then at the end of it, they play this really nice little tag, which goes C major, G over B, A minor, to G major, to F major, to G major, which takes you back to the verse and intro again.
Walking down this rocky road, wondering where my life is leading, rolling on to the bitter end. I'm finding out along the way what it takes to keep love living. You should know how it feels, my friend. I want you to stay, baby. I want you today. I'm ready for love. Oh, baby, I'm ready for love. Ready for love. Oh, baby, I'm ready for love. I'm waiting for you to come.
Ready for Love is a good example of Bad Company's ability to do a slower tempoed song.
I'm waiting for your call, baby. Oh, but now I'm on my feet again. Better things are bound to happen. All my dues surely must be paid. Many miles and many tears.
The great melody, the great vocal by Paul Rodgers, the real finesse in Mick Rouse's playing. And it's a song that everyone can identify with. I mean, they were reaching out to the heartland. They were touching your heart with a song like Ready for Love.
I want you today. Hey, I'm ready for love. Oh, baby, I'm ready for love. Ready for love. Oh, baby, I'm ready for love. Yeah. Don't you know I'm waiting for your call?
We were mixing the first album, and David Bowie and Angie came in when we were, because they knew Mick, because he produced all the young dudes. And they came in while we were mixing Ready for Love, and she was going, oh, I love this song, Ready for Love. And they were both singing it. And it still is. It's one of my favourite songs. And Mick said he wrote it in about 10 minutes.
I want you to stay, baby. I want you today. I'm ready for
You look on the Bad Co. on the black and white album, the first album, you'll see an imprint of a palm on the white lettering, because it was bad, you know. Hey man, it's bad. Not many people get that, but you'll see this imprint of someone's palm.
Bad Company's first album stands as one of the greatest rock and roll debuts ever. Not only did you have songs like Can't Get Enough, but you had killer tracks like the title track, Bad Company. You had Ready for Love, which was already recorded by Mata Hoople, which was the template for some of the most emotional Bad Company ballads. You had Rock Steady, from which I understand when they were recording the song, Paul Rodgers didn't know what to sing in that blank space, and then he just screamed out Rock Steady.
Got to rock steady.
From day one, first album on Swan Song label, they get Peter Grant and boom. Like, it calls like, you know, 7 or 8 hits. You know, I mean, like the first album.
Paul sang wonderfully for those first couple of albums. Everyone was just, and anything I did, Mick was like, boy, all right, that's lovely, you know, great. There was no analysing, well, try doing a bit of this, or...
It was a bigger sound, the drums were bigger, Paul was still singing unbelievable. I mean, there was still, it was a little bit of blues, but it was really more kind of electric arena rock.
Bad Company had opened up their account with Can't Get Enough, and on the second album they needed something that was, you know, very, very similar in its immediacy, and I think they found this perfectly in Feel Like Making Love.
It was a marriage of 2 songs. It was a little country song that Mick had, or Paul had rather, and then Mick had this dun 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 dun, and they just combined the two, and it kind of worked. It was sort of heavy metal meets country, and it, you know, it worked big time. It was another classic song.
It starts with this really lovely little sort of country acoustic thing. Which is a D major chord, and then a C over a D, and then basically a G over a D, a G suspended, back to a G, to a D. So. And then the verse is D major to G major, with a little country lick in it. And then the usual big chorus. Which is C, D, C, D, C, D, C, G, using the root and fifth again.
Baby, when I think about you, I think about love. Darling, I don't live without you and your love. If I had those golden dreams of my yesterday, I would wrap you in the heaven with Billy dying on the way.
It's very Californian, it's very American, I think. It's certainly radio friendly. And much as like Hotel California or, you know, Easy Living or something like that. I mean, it's just got some really nice quality to it.
Burrell is a great singer in his own right, and Mick Rouse can sing, so it's nice to hear all the sort of really kind of fairly sweet Eagles-y harmonies coming in the verses. Definitely gives this sort of country southern flavour.
It starts with a bit of foreplay. It starts very gently, you know. The syncopation of the guitar is very soft, and it just, you know, rolls itself up. And by the time you get to that top notch, when you've got that dip, bam, I mean, that's it, isn't it? That's your point of ejaculation. It's boom, boom, boom.
It's got dynamics. A lot of their music, a lot of good rock music has dynamics. It always does, and Bad Company's music had dynamics.
It's a song that is guaranteed to get the audience standing on their seats, cheering along. It's a theme that every hot-blooded male can identify with.
They were maybe ridiculed at times, you know, sort of sort of a sexual kind of angle that they put on things, and the sort of the macho kind of chest-beating thing that they were criticised for. But that was very much what, to many of their audience, was probably one of the aspects that appealed to them.
Feel like making. Feel like making love. Feel like making love. Feel like making love.
Again, it's deceptively simple. There's quite a lot of production going on. It sounds like it's just, you know, guitar-based drums, which is essentially the sound of Bad Company. But there's quite a lot going on. There's really nice sort of little kind of piano sort of touches throughout the verses, and then there's a Hammond organ that sort of swoops in the chorus. So it's only when you start listening on headphones and start really analysing what's going on, there's lots of little flavours and colours that I guess live they didn't really have some of those parts going on. It didn't seem to matter because the essential, the sort of soul of the song still sort of came through.
Just trying to understand what makes a woman do the things she does. One day she'll love you, the next day she'll leave you. Why can't we have it just the way it used to be? Woo!
If I remember correctly, Mick had written it with, I know Mick wrote it with Paul, and I think it was one of Paul's relationships, you know, but with him and a girl, that, yeah, good loving gone bad, bye-bye, I'll see you later.
Yeah, so go on and leave me for another. Good lovin' gone bad, yeah, 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 yeah. Good lovin' gone bad, bad, bad. Good lovin' gone bad, yeah. Baby, I'm a bad man.
Lovin Gone Bad is from Straight Shooter, which is arguably the band's best album.
They always say you have your whole life to write your first album, then you have 6 months to write your next. And Bad Company probably had less than 6 months to write their next record, but the follow-up, Straight Shooter, to me stands tall with the excellence of Bad Company.
Obviously they got clubbed together with a lot of the other bands from the 70s who were, in my opinion, quite different to Bad Company. And if you look at their albums, they were never a band to sort of go off and do 10, 15-minute songs. They were very much a band that wrote short, concise rock songs.
Shooting Star really stands out among Bad Company's catalog of songs. It's not about girls, it's not about trying to get a girl, it's not about trying to get sex, it's not strutting your machismo. It's a song about the tragic death of a rock and roll star. And Paul Rodgers' lyrics for that song are so evocative and moving. And from what I understand, it's a composite written about the death of Jimi Hendrix and Paul's great free comrade, Paul Kossoff.
Johnny died one night, died in his bed. Bottle of whiskey, sleeping tablets by his head. Johnny's life passed him by like a warm summer day. If you listen to the wind, you can still hear him play.
5-year span: Bad Company, Straight Shooter, Run with the Pack, Burning Sky, and Desolation Angels. 5 years, cornerstones of hard rock.
The albums were, you know, well produced and solid rock tracks, and you know, were definitely a Bad Company thing. But with a band that plays the way they play, the type of music they play, and how they viewed themselves, it's a live band.
All the songs live are much more intense than their recorded counterparts. You know, but they're two different animals, and they can be treated well either way.
You know, maybe they would change the guitar solos and things like that, and draw songs out a little longer, but not really. I mean, they kept everything really tight and concise, and I love that about them. It was song after song after song that was filled with great hooks, great energy, power, and incandescence.
When you listen to the records, the production is excellent. It's very kind of in your face. It's sort of, you know, you can't avoid it. It's sort of, you can't go around it. And live, it's kind of quite nice to see that it's not like that. It's a lot looser, and it's not as hard-edged. It doesn't have quite as much impact to me as the records.
One of the things that they used to do live was they didn't come out all guns blazing. They worked it up to a fever pitch. So their live performance was really quite different from the records. You know, it was structured in a very different way from their albums.
We were all great players, and it was simple. You see, and Mick, being a relatively sober guy, I mean, he could handle playing rhythm and lead at the same time. Paul also played some guitar, so sometimes they'd do some dual guitar stuff, but there was no weak link in the band. With Free, you're always wondering, you know, what's Koss going to be like today? Yeah, there was always that sort of reticence between the four of us, but with Bad Company, everyone was strong.
They could do a great rock and roll song like Rock Steady, and they could do an amazingly ethereal song like Burning Sky, for instance, which really made you feel that you were out there in the desert. And then they could come up with this emotionally affecting ballad which sounded like nothing you'd ever heard. It was very jangly. It was actually very Birdsy, a song called Silver, Blue, and Gold. It's a song from Run with the Pack, and it's an absolutely mesmerizing, heart-rending song. Bad Company could do it all.
The first album and Straight Shooter was probably the peak of what they did. And for me personally, every album subsequently was slightly worse.
Bad Company had all the plaques on the wall and all the awards, but I think we kind of lost our way after about the fourth album. We had a huge following, and we sort of rode it, you know, gently downhill.
As is the case, money, and they were making lots of money. Money makes things more difficult. It doesn't solve any problems. And I know that it was getting weird because now the guys who are writing the songs, they're getting a bigger cut from their songwriting publishing, and Simon, who's not writing, it started getting weird.
Paul had been given this octave divider by Leslie West from Mountain. It literally drops all the strings an octave on a guitar, and it was dang, dang, and I heard him playing with it in the studio, and suddenly out of this dang came dang, 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 and it was like, wow. And it was a great beat to play along to.
Once you had an octave down and an octave high to play the riff, it gives it quite a huge sound. And, you know, that wasn't quite a Bad Company type of sound, guitar-wise.
And it's a song where Bad Company is really stepping away and looking on the outside and delivering a song that talks a bit about the excitement of being a rock and roll star. Going on that stage with the lights out, and then the spotlight gets on you, and the whole place explodes with 20,000 people screaming your name, applauding, you could do no wrong. And I think that song just delivers a taste of what it was like to be able to enjoy that rock and roll fantasy.
Although the song itself is a good song, I think it's also a good example, I think, of how production-wise the band had gone over to perhaps a more American sound, which is inevitable because they were hugely popular in the States.
You can hear the sound, reaching for the sky, turning up the ground. It's all part of my rock and roll fantasy.
The production values on it are pretty strange. I mean, there's syndromes on it, which is really quite odd. And in a sense, for me, the production of that song actually clouds the song that's in there. It's a good song, but it's not my favourite because of that. The production values messed it up for me.
Probably the weakest record was the last album, Rough Diamonds, which really, I think, from what I understand, was a contractual obligation. But there were some good songs on that record. Electric Land was very much cut in the mold of Burning Sky. But by that time, they'd run out of steam.
If they had been able to sustain what they did on those first two records, I mean, they could have almost been like a Zeppelin. They had that background, and they had the singers and the names. I think what happens, every writer only has so many great songs in him. You know, it's not like you're a guitar player where if you keep playing, you're going to get better and better. As a songwriter, you may only have 8 great songs in you. And so at a point in time when that third or fourth record comes around and you know that it's as good as you could have done, and you tell yourself, you don't tell anybody else, but you tell yourself, this is not as good as what I did in that first record. That has to do something to you.
It was a shame when Paul decided to leave. Peter Grant went into seclusion, and so our management kind of folded, and we were sort of drifting around, and it was a terrible year. And Paul was unhappy, and he said, look, I'm off. And, you know, me and Mick and Boz decided after a year to carry on with someone else, and that became a bit of a nightmare. So that's the one episode in Bad Company's 30 years that I regret.
Any band really can continue with changing the lineups all the time, but it loses a lot of its continuity by doing that. And obviously the classic Bad Company years were the early years with the original 4.
There's 2 chapters of Bad Company, up to when Paul left in 1982, and then, you know, the 2 bands that came after that went under the name of Bad Company. For all intents and purposes, the original Bad Company was the best. For those 6 or 7 years, you know, we had a ball.
Had all the elements that I wanted to hear, you know, which was the blues thing, you know, the tough rock, you know, that lovely sounding guitar that Mick used to have, the great drumming of Simon, you know, Burrell's great bass playing, and also this extra thing with the harmonies going on. But of course the voice of Paul Rodgers.
They were a feel-good band, you know, they were having a good time, and they wanted you to have a good time, and they were singing about having a good time, and you know, delicate stuff like, you know, making love.
Some of the other bands that were around, their contemporaries at the time, have perhaps stayed in the limelight a lot more, but Bad Company tend to get overlooked these days. So I think they're not really given as much credit as they deserve.
Bad Company were anything but Bad Company. They were great company.
I'll tell you that I love you, baby, and you say yeah. I'll tell you that I love you, and you say yeah. You say yeah. You say yeah, yeah, yeah. I'll tell you that I love you, baby. And I can't get enough of your love.